All right, welcome back to Super Team Germany's Product Guild. Wow, that brought us in really close. Let's put a little bit of a background on there. That was a little too close for my comfort. If you're tuning into tonight's Product Guild, you are here because you think you're going to get a Figma walkthrough of one of my projects with a developer and the release of a really important Solana-based website. You're not. As things happen, we have a little bit of work left to do, some last minute changes. So last minute pivot, and I'm so excited today to welcome to the Product Guild Arikia Millikan from CTRL+X, and we are going to talk a little bit about how to build more content-heavy products and her journey of building CTRL+X, something she's been working on for a really, really long time, and I'm so excited to pivot to this today, bring her to you, and have you meet her as well. Welcome in. Thank you for the last-minute substitution.
Yeah, no problem. Super happy to be here and to see you again since our last foray in Estonia talking about content in the crypto world.
It was so great. It was really such an amazing panel. I loved doing that with you. And I love CTRL+X as well. I know quite a bit about it, but do you want to share with our audience who isn't in Super Team Germany or who has never heard you speak before at the Decentralized Media Summit or any of these other badass things you've done? Give us the TLDR on CTRL+X.
Yeah, absolutely. So CTRL+X is a blockchain-based content licensing system that enables creators, namely journalists and other writers, to license their content to themselves on the blockchain and then use a tokenized system to distribute that content and monetize it in the Web3 ecosystem. So we're pushing back against the centralized systems that predominantly reign in the digital publishing spaces right now that make it difficult for creators to monetize their works. And the systems generally are incredibly value extractive and push the quality of content down this like enshittification funnel. It's a term coined by Cory Doctorow that just reflects like how everything gets worse when creators aren't actually compensated for their life's work, when these huge companies are just in the business of extracting. So I really like high quality content. I've worked in the journalism industry for the past 20 years and have an educational background in engineering. So I started building CTRL+X to really address some of the fundamental infrastructure problems in the digital publishing industry that I've personally encountered like hundreds of times throughout my career with respect to my work or the work of writers that I've edited or commissioned being deleted or like changed in some way or just devalued to the point where there's no resources left in the system for journalists to keep being journalists. And obviously, this is a time when we need quality journalism more than ever. So I don't want to see what the world looks like where journalists don't exist. So that's why CTRL+X does exist.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really important segue in, because a lot of times if you're building a product, one of the things you need to explain to investors or VCs or just even to get your product out there is why blockchain. And so I think you made that very clear, but maybe you could go another layer different. So the people in our audience in here, they're going to be product designers, they're going to be UX UI designers, they're going to be founders who are also trying to understand that UX UI side. So that's another perk that we have with you being in here today, being a founder and having built the product and overseen it and had those design conversations. Why blockchain? If somebody was to say to you, why your product has to exist on blockchain, and in case people didn't get that from the start intro that you just gave us, how would you tell them why, and maybe even why Solana?
So there are three terms that I always come back to when I think about blockchain. And blockchain has been kind of like the prominent infrastructural component to Control+X from day one of when I started designing this 10 years ago. And the first aspect is permanence. So one of the problems with the centralized systems are that is that they're dependent on these platforms that are subject to business cycles and decisions where they're very volatile. So they're happening very quickly, and there are a lot of these centralized nodes everywhere. And so, like, if you think of a publication as one of the centralized nodes, if that publication folds, which we're seeing happen all over, then it's TBD what happens to all of the hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of pieces of content that were associated with that node. And so this is creating digital black holes where if a company just collapses and doesn't pay its hosting bills, or the new owner of the company decides like, well, I just wanted to buy them to squash them because I don't like their political lean, so they can just kind of delete this sector of human history. But with a blockchain-based infrastructure, the entire blockchain would have to fold if the system is properly designed to avoid these kind of centralized traps that you can also replicate with a blockchain-based infrastructure if you're not careful. But that's why we're being careful.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have a
another
yeah.
What you were just saying actually reminded me. I saw on your Instagram that you were reading a book that I just so happen to love and recommend to people who are getting into it, which is Read, Write, Own by Chris Dixon. And I think because we tend to think of blockchain so much right now as payments, DeFi related, we forget about that content side and how it can be a strong tool for historical and societal anthropological preservation. And you might already know where I'm going with this by pulling this book out. The section where he talks about in Web 2 and the current world, when you have content and you leave that platform, you can't take your content with you. Whereas as we're working on the user experience within Web 3, and similar to what you're talking about with black holes, we have the ability to give people the opportunity to move their content with them, to keep their content tied to their name, not tied to a platform. And I think that opens up that kind of larger user experience discussion that other people might not have if they're doing a DeFi. You know, they're not really, like, the wallet is just kind of taken for granted that that person takes their wallet across different platforms. But when we're talking about human generated content and history and articles and journalism, that is at such a deep level that I think it needs a little bit more attention. Did that make sense at all?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like there are some analogs in the DeFi world. Like there's this expression to be your own bank. I actually have that printed on a suit that I wear when I give talks sometimes. Like I'm my own bank.
Yeah, it was in Estonian. It was badass.
Oh yeah, true. Good memory. And I think it's like a similar concept here where a lot of the DeFi systems are encouraging users who participate in these systems to really maintain their wallets so that they know where their money is at all times and they can control how it's moved, versus like giving the control to a bank that's going to be able to tell them like, no, you can't move that right now, or only under these conditions, because the bank is the one that's deriving the most value from the content. Well, it's similar in publishing ecosystems where like Web 2 hosted publications can be thought of as sort of like content banks. And that content is sitting on these platforms generating value for someone that's not necessarily the writer. And it's doing that it's a rainy day outside, so they're being very needy today. And I couldn't
love this. It's like Snow White.
But so that value that articles are generating for the companies that own the publications might be derived from advertisements. That's kind of like the classic one. And the amount of value that was possible through ads has dropped like exponentially over the last 15 years since the switch from print media to online. Like that's still a very new process, and basically the industry bet wrong on the advertising industry as a way to sustain, or they didn't diversify their revenue streams enough, or maybe they didn't even care that like that value was going to go to certain people within publications, but then create this sort of like bottoming out effect where the reason why people are actually going to the publications to click on the ads is to access the content. And so that content needs to be produced somewhere. So advertising kind of like bottomed it out. They tried to backfill with the data mining business model, just kind of like scouring users' data and selling it for various purposes, like lots of them illegal by today's current measures. And now, legislation has come up, especially in Europe, like in Germany, where we're both located, that is preventing these companies from using this sort of business model to further extract value from users. So then it's like, well, what's left for these companies? Now they're looking to AI to kind of backfill this bottomed out void of quality content that's been created by these unfortunate business decisions of the past 15 years. And that has its limits as well, because readers aren't stupid. Like, people know what they're interacting with to a certain extent. And while it is getting more, I think people have sort of like largely forgotten what it's like to have access to abundant quality content. And so we're kind of like lowering our bar of expectations as readers of like, I kind of know what's going on. Like, I'll read the headline there. I might not need to like read the entire body text. Like, I think I
should.
Yeah, but then that's, one of the ways that misinformation is able to proliferate, which leads me to one of the other aspects of blockchain that make it so qualified for this use case, which is provenance. So being able to attribute ownership of an asset, like an article or a photograph that's tied to an event that happened, and be able to say, this definitely was written by this individual. They are the owner of this asset, and here's how we can prove it. And that's something that, like, with Web 2 content management systems and databases, like, that record is locked away into a privatized system where it's like the IT team for that company that has the access to kind of go in and see things and change things. But with a blockchain-based system, the ledger is publicly available. It's transparent. So we can begin to display that information and enable creators to make decisions about how their information is displayed on a whole new level that I think is going to unlock a lot of new possibilities, just in terms of how creators are able to demonstrate the factual record associated with their own career performance. Because right now, if you ask a writer to show you their portfolio, like to be able to read through all the articles that they've written in history, most of them won't be able to come close. Like they can maybe send you a few clips of PDFs that they've stored, but if they're sending you all the URLs, the majority of those are like the body text is going to be locked behind content paywalls from the publications that are still trying to claw back as much value as they can scrape together through the subscription model, which has also reached its limit.
I have so many thoughts on that from being part of Harkness research, and where we're working more on like that academic publishing side, where we have those kind of crossovers as well, where those paywalls are so predatory. And I run into this as a lecturer where I published a study and I couldn't even use it in class because we didn't have access to that journal and we couldn't afford to pay for it. So I'm teaching a class on the subject and I can't use my own research. And that was so frustrating to me. And that's a moment, one of my kind of eye-opening moments in terms of coming on chain, things like that. So you said you had 3 good reasons and you've given us 2. And I interrupted both 1 and 2. So I wanted to give you the chance to do number 3 if it was present.
We might have to come back to that.
Perfect.
Reason number 3 has left the building in this moment, but it'll come back. Amazing. I'm a bit jet lagged, so that's my excuse.
Yeah, no problem at all. Let's talk about, you've given us so much great info and great insight into the depth of your product. You have a lot of content, you have a lot of people involved, you have a lot of purpose in terms of preserving people's body of work. And I hope that people that are watching this that are more on the DeFi side can learn from where we're going to take this conversation, because if you're about to turn off going, oh, this is copyright, oh, this is content, this doesn't apply to me, hold tight for me, because if you have a website where you're building to pull all of this content in, to manage all of these people, you have a lot of challenges as well. Filtering, organization, the user experience, your login walls, things like that. Talk to me a little bit about, I mean, how did you even get started? What did it look like to go, I've got to build this massive data repository? What was your first step? And was there a moment when you were like, no, I can't, or?
No, there's never that moment. Like, if there's one thing that I'm doing in this lifetime, it's this. So I've tried to pause and like take breaks. And then there was a moment kind of when the blockchain industry was in its like art scam NFT phase, where I was like, maybe I was wrong about that. But then as soon as I dove back in, I was like, no, I was still right. But yeah, it started with a lot of sketches. So as a writer, and I mean, I've been a journaler since I could hold a pen, pretty much. Just like, I have hundreds of notebooks that all have to stay with me, like wherever I am in the world. And I've moved a lot and they're quite heavy. So it's always been a problem to lug them around. But yeah, just being able to kind of like take something from inside of my head and sketch it out on a series of, like, I have this static cling paper that goes on the wall where I can just kind of like turn any room into a whiteboard and then like photograph and preserve those in my storage system. So it's like a lot of architectural diagrams, and I don't know, that's just sort of how my brain works with like mapping things out. Maybe it's because my dad was an architect. But I've always just seen really clearly how these,
I love how you're like, I've always seen really clearly Birdlands. Like,
yeah.
Is this Violet?
Yeah, just highlighting the crown chakra. That's like how I see see clearly. But I've seen really clearly how the content management systems that have been in favor throughout the duration of my career have kind of like throttled the ways that people are actually inclined to work in content production ecosystem. So like going back to old newsrooms of the past, and just like how people communicate and share information and how that process shifts when the pressure increases. And journalism is a very high pressure industry at certain extremes. I mean, you have all different kinds, but especially like when I came into my career around like 2008 to 10, like that was when I was really getting going. And that was the era of the 24-hour news cycle, where you have to conceive of a story, get it vetted, write it, edited, and published all within 24 hours. So that sort of environment was enabled largely by the digital tools that we had at our disposal for the first time in that era. But those tools hit limits in that environment as well. And that was what I had a front row seat to, and was the person on the team that was kind of just always thinking about that friction between the managerial decisions of like, we need this now, and the pressure that it was putting on the team members who were using the tools to produce it, because nobody wants to say, sorry, this is really funny, actually. I want to show you. My birds talk to the Wi-Fi router sometimes.
Oh my gosh.
And now, probably because it's a live stream, the router's making like some funny like beep beeps that they're just like, what's happening there?
What is this big worm bird over here?
Yeah. But because of that tension, and observing the tension between writers that were kind of struggling to keep up and maintain the pressure to do their jobs in this like a pressure cooker of an environment, and seeing like how the tools could actually shift to be more accommodating, but then there wasn't often an investment into the progression of the tools from the publisher's perspective, so the managerial level of the publications, because all that money was going into ad tech, into data mining tech, and things that would produce immediate
You're so talented, like not missing a beat.
Yeah. One of my birds was climbing the cable to the router, so it's just making sure it didn't come unplugged. Well,
awesome. So building this product, you've said a couple really interesting things in there, like advancing tools, creating the new tools, finding symbiosis between actual useful tools or tools that have kind of gone by the wayside and are no longer useful, which I think is a really strong case for blockchain and bringing pieces online as well. What I keep thinking about, though, as you're talking, is filtering content. And it's kind of like if you were using a network explorer or a block explorer or even a wallet, and you wanted to filter to get the content that you wanted to have, you would have to design that experience. Let's talk about your actual process of designing your MVP, because I know your MVP is ready.
Yeah, the MVP was finished end of April. Wow, that feels like ages ago.
How long did it take to build?
We did a 2-month sprint that was pretty intensive. But it was also really fun just because of the team that I was working with, still I'm working with. And we also had a really amazing user interface and experience designer named Miho Soon, who came into the process, and I had never worked at that level with a user interface designer before, and that was really like the missing link, because Julie Yi, our blockchain engineer, is very skilled. Like we have an amazing dynamic together. We're very good at, like, I'll describe something and she can kind of like just get what I'm talking about, because her background educationally is in creative writing, and then she became a blockchain engineer, whereas I kind of started at the engineering level and then went into journalism. So we have a good way of like meeting each other in the middle, but when it comes to how things actually look on a page, that's something that my brain doesn't really extend to. Like I'm good at looking at something and saying like, yeah, that's it, or like it needs to change in these ways. But if it's like a blank page, then my brain defaults to text and kind of like stick diagrams of flows and how things work. So Miho came in and kind of got into the middle of the work process between engineering and, I guess, vision, if you want to call it that, and was just able to really like go through this process and put things in front of us where we could say like, yes, no, like let's shift it a little bit, and then, you know, go through the layers of progression to fully design a system that would be usable and even favored over existing systems to our target demographic of independent journalists.
Yeah. When she was in that design process, I love that you said it felt like the missing link. I think a lot of founders or devs or CTOs expect a designer just to come in and design like a pretty picture and that would be it. But it's actually a pretty intense process in terms of the research and the flows and figuring out how people click and where they're most likely to move. What was it like for you just to kind of be a part of that experience? Were you involved in the research phase at all, in the user research on that? Or was that something you already had done and you just kind of handed over?
Well, so, I mean, I've been doing user research for the past 10 years. Around, yeah, like specifically about Control+X and about these problems, and just really, you know, kind of making it a regular process to, as I'm interacting with all of these journalists, you know, I've interacted with thousands of journalists over the course of my career, and always asking the questions about like the infrastructure and the tooling and the problems that they're having, and like what they would like to see in their kind of like fantasy future vision of how a process should work, even though lots of them, especially in the corporate environment, have just kind of given up on the possibility that things will ever be different. And if it's going to change, it's going to be worse, they're afraid. So there is sort of this like large scale resistance in the field to like adopting new tools. And so when there is one to adopt, it's usually either coming from like corporate pressure, like inside of an institution where there's staff employees, the corporation's telling them like, this is what we're switching to, you have this long to learn it, which is just like, and it's painful and there's a learning curve. But now what we're seeing in the industry, especially because there aren't that many staff journalists anymore, those positions have been just on the chopping block for the past decade, whereas like freelance roles are rising, which are a lot more unstable in terms of your life expenses, your healthcare, like your protection from frivolous libel lawsuits from whatever powerful person you might piss off with an accurate depiction of the crimes they're committing. I digress. Like, because those staff positions are becoming less stable and freelancing is more common, what we're seeing now is like companies like Medium and Substack have swooped in with this aura of like kind of white knight behavior, like we're gonna save the day. Meanwhile, they're replicating the same problems of the centralized systems that came before them, but they had the big funding rounds, like the Silicon Valley money, and so they were able to buy writers to come in initially and kind of like seed the network with quality content, so that at least that was a magnet that made other people think like, well, if this professional writer is here, then maybe I should be there too, because it'll help my professionality, which is of course a fallacy, that now there's this kind of mass exodus from these platforms that are becoming more and more enshittified. And now the motivation for platform switching is like, is there anything else to use than this place that we all hate and don't want to be? So that's like one of the biggest design challenges, and why it is so necessary to be critically involved in the design process as the founder of this company, because sorry,
They're just agreeing with everything you're saying. They're like, yeah, you're doing great.
Yeah. Sorry, one sec. Come here, they're actually disagreeing with the crows that are circling outside. Excuse me. Sorry.
What you said just reminded me of another Chris Dixon quote. So keep talking, and I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking for it in the book. So
yeah, there's so many good ones in that book.
Yeah.
But it's so important because, and I think I know the one that you're talking about. It's like the like when users kind of move from one platform to another, there's a level of resistance there, and you don't get a lot of chances. It's like this process that has to do with like timing and things you can't control. So, perfection is the enemy of progress for sure, but you want to make damn sure that when you've gone through the process of getting a user in your target demographic to come and try what you're doing, then it needs to be a place that's actually providing value to their lives and doing what you've told them it's going to do. So.
Yeah, and when you're trying to get them to switch from one platform to another, I think you have a harder job in this, because in DeFi, what we're so lucky with when we're working on a DEX or an AMM or something of that is people will let us put out a shitty product, and they'll let us put out that alpha version, that beta version, and they'll live test it with us and find the holes. They're okay with that in DeFi. It's totally acceptable. But I think when we go into a little bit more of trying to bring traditional W2 products onto W3, like journals, like a social media outlet, like an art gallery or things like that, people aren't as forgiving in the growth. They want it perfect from the beginning. And they're not going to switch from a Web 2 to a Web 3 product if there's too much friction within that change process. And I think that's a big part of the design process, that as people from Web 2 come into Web 3, it's a benefit, because they can say, hey, we need to do this flow, this isn't right. But it's also going to be a challenge that I think is going to turn a lot of designers off, because people just want to ship. You've got 1 week, you've got 2 weeks, your vibe coding, your AI wireframing, trying to get it out. And I think this is what I am so interested in Control+X, is because you have one hell of a process to get a product on the market that people understand the value of having. You're fighting against a lot of people who don't want that product out because of the repositories that are out there. And also the users aren't going to be a lot of the DeFi users right now. They're going to be people from that Web 2 world, and they want that kind of frictionless entry point. They want it to look what they're used to. I want to talk a little bit more about how you're designing the content, because when you have a content heavy website, one of the biggest, this is another reason I wanted you to come on, because you know how to structure long form content into digestible formats. And I think this will be really helpful for founders who are doing like their Git books or their company documentation or a learning process on their website. They're just dropping a shit ton of content and overwhelming their user. So let's talk about how, as a journalist, how you break up content, how you design content to be read, and specifically with CTRL+X, what that process looks like of making sure these journal articles and long form content is digestible.
So there is this thing called the upside down pyramid that is sort of like journalism 101. And I'm glad I started out in the newspaper world and was kind of like on the cusp of the transition between print and digital, where I did work on the print side at a daily newspaper and a few magazines before I fully immersed in the digital side, because it used to be that you had this opportunity called above the fold, which was talking about the actual crease in the newspaper where people would physically pick it up and look at it, and all of the words that were there above the fold determined if they were going to unfold the first page and turn the page or not. So
I'm laughing so hard because all of my mentees from the Breakout Hackathon are like, if I hear you say above the fold one more time. So if you're watching this, it's not just me. And this is the 3rd episode now where we've been above the fucking fold. I mean,
that would be a good name for a podcast, like a content design podcast.
Should we start it?
Yeah, I think so. Like we need one more thing to do, but yes.
All right, so back on your answer, sorry.
So that's where the upside down pyramid motif came from, where that top line has the most weight. Like the first sentence of an essay, of an article, should be given the most importance. It should be the most information dense or the most hooking, thrilling, enthralling line, because that's what determines if someone is going to read on to the second line, which should be the second most enthralling, information dense piece of writing in the piece, and so on and so on. And that's something that AI is horrible at. Just off the cuff, if you're like, AI, write this essay for me, which I don't do. But I've seen other people try that, and it just can't get it because it's such a subjective thing. But that's a really important design. And then also like looking at the overall structure of a piece, especially in long form. Like I think there's a lot of, and I'm about to release an article on the CTRL+X website about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically like the less you know about something, the more you think you know. And then the more you know, the more you feel like you actually don't know. So there's a lot of people, like when it comes to writing, that are kind of sitting at the top of this peak, like the top of Mount Stupid, where they're like, oh, writing's easy. Look, like I can write an email. It was understood. Okay, so now I can write like a 10,000 word essay and everyone should be able to understand that too. No. So when you're in the business of writing and editing and you're looking at not just like does the overall structure make sense to carry the point from beginning to end, but is every paragraph in the right position? Is every line of every paragraph in the right position? And is every word of every sentence the best word to convey the meaning of that sentence, and in relation also to the sentences around it? So that's kind of like the whole constellation of thoughts that are going through an editor's mind when they're designing content, which, you know, different for the advertising world where it's all about like can this soundbite penetrate someone's frontal lobe? Okay, like that's not really my business, but like I know it when I see it. Like, oh yeah, that got in there despite my efforts. So when we're looking at bringing that experience into a new digital environment, because for better or worse, email right now is currently the best protocol to read on still, because there at least you can, for the most part, control what else is coming into your field of vision, and you're not getting bombarded by ads and scams and like whatever else processing is like going on in the background of your web browser. And I think that like in general, we're moving away from like web browsers as a mode, like as a medium and infrastructure of absorbing information, because of how much they've been abused in the past. So this is a huge opportunity in the Web3 space that I see, because we can now design environments for accessing different types of content and distributing them to each other, that are beyond these centralized modes of control that just have so much other stuff in the environment that are out of our control, that these platforms are saying this is the cost of entry. Like, you have to read a tweet that you hate in order to see something that you might like. I don't think that should be the decision point for how we interact in our leisure time. And that's also something, like, just going back to the like DeFi, like the difference with like building DeFi products and content products that you were talking about earlier. I think in the DeFi scene, the reason why users are choosing to engage with these products is fundamentally different from with journalism, in that like one can be largely like entertainment based, while the other is sort of this like utilitarian, like I need to do my civic duty to like understand what's happening in this situation. So, when you're in the mindset of like kind of la la la, like I'm gonna play in a casino right now, versus like I need to understand what's happening in Syria right now. Like, is it World War III? Do I need to like find a bomb shelter? Like, you're in like a fundamentally different mindset. So if something is blocking you, like blocking your path of user behavior from doing what you're trying to do when you're in a more frantic, like purpose-driven state, than in a more like relaxed, like I've got money to blow, whatever, like let's become millionaires state, it's gonna feel more dire when you hit those roadblocks. So it's more challenging, I think, to design for that type of determined user.
Definitely. And I think that's a really good point, because when you're going into design for your product, and as we are designing in a new space that isn't at mass adoption yet, or even up on the mass adoption curve, you really have to understand your users' behavior and their mentality and what they're used to and why they're using your product. And is it a dopamine hit? A lot of DeFi brings that dopamine, and so they can get addicted to the product very quickly and come back, which we've seen time and time again. But that ease and that recognition also helps people form that human connection to the product. 2 questions left for you. What is next for Control+X? What do you feel like you still have to improve in the design, and when do you think it's gonna come out to mass users?
Yeah, so the beginning of 2026 is kind of our release goal right now, where we've already started to onboard a very specific type of user that can use the MVP system as we've built it right now, but that's at the creator level. So what they're doing is coming in and backing up their content archives from Web 2 systems into a decentralized storage environment that's based on Arweave technology, which is permanent storage, as opposed to the kind of like pay-as-you-go cloud storage that's subject to centralized business decisions. And that user type is really specific because it is the minimum viable product right now. And that means that we're talking about content that was created by a single author who is the same person that owns 100% of the IP of that asset. So as soon as we start to add additional authors or a publication layer on top of that IP ownership level, the complexity skyrockets. And so there are so many amazing tools and protocols and methodologies already in existence right now in the Web3 world that can be applied to this problem set. And that's what we're in the process of uncovering right now, which is like when you have a single asset that not only was created by multiple individuals, and the thing that I always come back to that people are kind of like, wow, I didn't realize that before about journalism, is like there might be one person's name on an article that's like a professional quality article, and that might prompt one to assume that that one person is like an amazing writer, but there may have been 20 different people that actually touched that piece of content through the publication, which is employing all those people to do things in the background that enhance the quality of the overall product of that single piece of content. So that dynamic is, I think it's been like stripped down from the experiences of these platishers like Medium and Substack, like half published or like, you know, wanting the benefits of a publisher without the responsibilities and the benefits of a platform without the responsibilities as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that's just really critical to build into the system, is like no journalist is an island. Like we function in a very interconnected way where, especially people working around a niche topic, like we have to be reading what the other people in our niche, in our, like on our beat, are writing about in order to do our jobs, which is different from kind of like, I use the music industry a lot as an example. Like to write a song, you don't necessarily need to hear like all the other songs in your genre. Maybe like the very professionals at the top like would do that and know, but yeah, the biggest design challenge is that kind of like multi-user experience, and then factoring in like the curational layer and the publication layer and how those pre-existing human systems interact in this digital environment.
It's intense. Intense, but I hope everyone who's listening and has hung out with us can see the connections and the value of hearing the experience of a designer that might be, or sorry, a founder that might be a little bit out of your specific genre within Web3 DeFi. Last question. I normally phrase this in terms of design, but we're just going to go creativity for you. Who would you say, I love building a resource library. When it comes to creativity or inspiration, who is your top source of inspiration?
Like in the design world, or?
It could be, you could go design if you wanted to, or because you're more on that content writing, journalism, historical side, anything that really keeps your creative energy going, where do you turn to first?
I mean, someone at the top of mind right now, because I just was in New York City and got to see her again, is Molly Crabapple. She started off in the world of like modeling first, and then became a sketch artist, and then moved her sketch art into the world of journalism, and is in this overlap of journalism and graphic art. And she has been inside of courtrooms that don't allow photographs, like the ones in Guantanamo, for example. And she has allowed her creativity to push her kind of like physical presence into situations where she's gathering information and she's storytelling in ways that I've always seen as being pretty new and innovative to the industry. She's just always pushing limits. And like, I first heard of her when she did this thing called Molly Crabapple's Week in Hell, which was when Kickstarter first came out. And she did a fundraiser where she said she was gonna, and then she did it. Actually, she locked herself in a hotel room where she had covered all of the 4 walls with paper, and then said, I'm not coming out for a week, and I'm going to cover every piece of this paper in ink. And that was like such an innovative thing for me. It's like the whole world can be your medium for creative expression if you're just brave enough to push yourself into these places and put your goal out there and say, I'm going to do this. Like, who wants to watch? So that's, I'm trying to like incorporate more of that into my processes, and I'm doing this. So I hope there are lots of people out there that want to see this product exist and to be able to contribute to the building of this new infrastructure that I think will fundamentally change the way journalism is practiced in the future, and be able to kind of like shift the needle from a state where everything is like crumbling and crashing down to a place where there's like a new green pasture for these highly skilled practitioners that we're all depending on for our freedom, for our democracy, to know like what's going on in the world, like where those people can continue to practice.
Wow. I'm gonna have to look her up at that. I love this so much. And that's why I love asking this, because normally with designers, I have to tell them you can't use Steve Jobs and you can't use Chris Dixon, or not Chris Dixon, but Nora, what's his name? Don Norman. I'm like, Norm, brain fart. So it was interesting. And I love just seeing these different creative aspects then where people go, it gives everyone a different opportunity just to kind of break out, try new things. Last little bit, please tell us where the audience can find you. If they want to follow CTRL+X, if they want to follow you more, how do they find you out on the internet?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is that you can just put an @ in front of my name, and that's basically like my social presence everywhere, or it will like lead you to the links for things. You can also go to CTRL+X.world and find our currently Web2 Ghost site for content where we're blogging about the issues at hand. And that site is also now has like a Web3 analog, because Ghost is our first content management system that we're integrating with into Web3. So if you are a current Ghost user and independent journalists and are interested in learning more about CTRL+X, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and would love to have you be one of our first test users.
Yeah.
And birdies agree.
The birdies definitely agree. And as always, I'm going to be doing a recap on this episode tomorrow, and I will put these links in all of the show notes, everything that I post so you can connect. Thank you so much to you and your beautiful birds for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Ciao.
Bye.